Welcome to my channel. If you are ready to fall asleep, let's start our story. You awaken slowly, not to the comfort of soft sheets or the filtered light of a familiar window, but to the taste of dust in your throat, the heat of a rising sun pressing against the thin skin of your eyelids, and the weight of silence broken only by distant thuds and the dry scrape of stone against stone. And for a moment, perhaps longer, you do not move, not because of fear, but because your body, unsure of where it has landed, waits for the world to explain itself, but no explanation comes. Only the steady rhythm of labor echoing across the desert like a forgotten drumbeat. And when you finally open your eyes, the light is too bright, so white and wide that everything blurs into a haze of beige and gold, and only gradually do shapes begin to resolve. The corner of a sun-baked wall, the ragged edge of a cloth canopy fluttering above you, the cracked leather of a sandal lying beside your bare feet, and beyond that, the slow march of figures moving in time, not walking, not running, but advancing like the turning of a wheel, endless, exact, and without question. Now you feel the heat already rising from the ground, the fine grit of sand stuck to your skin like a second unwanted layer, and you know, without knowing how, that this is no dream, for dreams are not this detailed, not this dry, not this relentless in their realism. And when you try to sit up, every muscle aches as though it has labored for weeks, and your hands, caked with dust, bear calluses you do not remember earning. And you taste salt on your lips, not from the sea, but from your own dried breath. And above you, the sky is a pale, unforgiving blue that offers no comfort, no softness, only the promise of heat and more heat. And somewhere, not far away, someone shouts a sharp, clipped word in a language you do not understand, but you feel its meaning. Command, a demand for motion, and instinctively you rise, staggering a little, blinking against the light, and as your eyes adjust, you see it. The massive blocks of stone stacked high like frozen thunder, too large to comprehend, casting long shadows that cool nothing but dominate everything. And you realize you are standing in a camp not of soldiers, not of wanderers, but of workers, hundreds of them, bent and darkened by sun and labor, hauling and carving and aligning the very bones of the earth. And you feel the pulse of it, the rhythm of a purpose far older than yourself. And though you do not know your name or how you came here, the dust on your tongue, the heat on your skin, and the rough cloth wrapped around your waist tell you one thing. Clearly, you are one of them now. And whatever this place is, wherever it leads, it has already claimed your breath, your skin, and your silence. There is no introduction, no ceremony, no moment where someone takes your hand and explains the order of things or the reasons behind the rhythm you now belong to. For here, in this place of heat and dust and sweat-soaked linen, there are no names spoken unless shouted in urgency or etched on papyrus long after the body has fallen still. And as you rise unsteadily to your feet and blink the morning haze from your eyes, a figure passes you by without glance, without question. His arms burdened by a clay jar that sloshes faintly with the sound of precious water. And something in your legs, though still sore, though unfamiliar with themselves, begins to move, to follow, not by choice, but by gravity, as if your body already understands the choreography of this life. And soon you find yourself trailing behind others through a narrow corridor of tents and stacked baskets. Past hunchbacks bent over whetstones and boys no older than 10 brushing sand from measured lines drawn into hardened mud. And someone presses a length of coarse rope into your hand without a word, nods toward a distant yoke where more jars await. And though your arms tremble as you lift, you manage to balance the weight across your shoulders, strap digging into flesh softened by an easier life you can no longer remember. And so begins your first duty, not a ritual entered willingly, but a necessity wrapped in silence. For in the pyramid builder's camp, work is the only language, and your first word is effort, heavy and immediate and without promise of end. And as you walk behind 2 others toward a cluster of palm-shaded cisterns carved into the earth, the sun fully clears the horizon, bathing everything in the blinding gold of truth. And the air, already warm, thickens with the heat of 10,000 footsteps, churning dust into clouds that settle onto every surface skin, stone, cloth, tongue, till you cannot tell what belongs to you and what belongs to the land. And when you arrive at the edge of the water pit, there is no pause, only motion. A jar lowered, filled, lifted, sealed, hoisted again, and it continues. This rhythm, not as punishment or cruelty, but as necessity, because stone cannot move without flesh, and flesh cannot endure without water. And you, new to this world, new to this body, are already part of the chain that turns dust into tombs and memory into monument. And as the morning wears on and your shoulders grow numb and your neck aches and the rope rubs your skin raw, no one asks how you came here, because it does not matter, only that you are here now and that you carry and that you lift, and that when the foreman passes by with a stick tapping the ground in time to your steps, you do not stop or speak, but nod slightly, because in this place, acknowledgement is earned not through words, but through endurance. And as noon approaches, and the water you carry steams, and the jars, and your breath comes in slow, shallow pools, you begin to understand that in this world made of dust and stone, time is not marked by hours or days, but by how many trips your feet can take before they fail, and how many scars your hands collect before they are no longer yours. And that here, in the camp beneath the rising pyramid, to be seen is to move, and to belong is to suffer quietly. There comes a moment after the water has been lifted and poured after your shoulders to have numbed themselves into silence, and the heat has wrapped itself around your body like a second skin, when you are no longer given solitary motion, but placed within a line that moves not with thought or intention, but with the deep ancestral rhythm of a system older than speech. And it begins with a gesture. It's a crooked finger from a man whose face is carved by sun and grit, and whose eyes see not your features, but your frame. And you do not ask what is required, because questions do not live here. Instead, you step into place behind another, mirroring the way he shifts his stance, the way he bends and straightens in perfect, deliberate cycles. And before you is the end of a rope, thick and knotted, trailing from a massive stone resting upon a wooden sled, groaning with weight and time. And as the chant begins, not shouted, above, murmured like a breath shared among dozens of throats, you grasp the rope and pull, and for the first time, feel the strain of stone that refuses to yield easily, that resists like a slumbering god, unwilling to be moved, and yet, as bodies ahead of you pull in sync, the sled begins to inch forward across the oiled track of logs laid over sand, and you feel impossibly. The stone responds not in speech or sound, but in vibration, in the way it seems to breathe through your hands, and your breath aligns with theirs, with his, with hers, with everyone who now moves as one. And you are no longer a man among strangers, but a single cell in a great muscle that bends the will of the earth. And the chant grows louder, not joyful, but steady, holding time, holding purpose. And the overseer, walking alongside with a palm branch in hand, taps rhythmically against his thigh nut to strike, but to remind, to guide, to mark the beat that holds your arms and legs together. And the dust rises as the sled groans again, and your feet slide, and your toes grip, and your back aches, and yet the stone moves, and you move, and the chant deepens, and it continues for hours, the sun climbing ever higher, your world shrinking to a length of rope, the breath of those beside you, and the relentless pulse of exertion. And though no one speaks to you, though no one smiles or gestures, you feel a kind of welcome, not soft or warm, but earned through sweat and shared silence. And when the sled reaches the base of the next rise and the rope is released, and you all stumble back, panting and dust-streaked, no one says, "Well done," but someone hands you a strip of soaked linen, and you press it to your neck and nod, and they nod in return. And the language of survival continues unspoken, unrelenting, and somewhere behind your ribs. The echo of the chant continues even after the voices stop. A rhythm that now lives inside you like a second heart carved from stone. When the stone has come to rest upon its bed of sand, angled and positioned with an exactitude that suggests reverence as much as engineering, the line disperses without fanfare, without command, each worker peeling away from the rope and drifting toward shade, not in chaos, but in quiet knowing, as if the end of labor has been felt in the bones before it has been spoken, and you follow, not because you are told to, but because every fiber in your body now begs for stillness. And so, you find yourself in the shallow relief of a wooden awning, its beams dark with the breath of many men, where the air, though still hot, carries a slightly different quality of softness, not born of comfort, but of temporary reprieve. And you lower yourself to the packed earth legs, folded awkwardly beneath you, spine hunched, not from defeat, but necessity, and beside you, others sit or lie or lean, their eyes half-lidded, their skin caked with sweat and dust. And though you are among them, close enough to feel the rise and fall of their breath, there is no conversation, no laughter, no exchange of words. Only the shared intimacy of exhaustion, the sacred silence of bodies emptied of resistance. And in this silence, something strange begins to happen. For while your limbs relax and your heartbeat slows, your mind, no longer gripped by the urgency of movement, begins to wander not forward, not backward, but inward, into the folds of memory and uncertainty and sensation. And in that space, you hear not voices, but impressions, the soft drag of a foot across sand, the wheeze of breath through a cracked lip, the distant knock of chisel on stone, and it becomes clear that in this place, silence is not emptiness, but presence, dense and layered and alive. Okay. And you realize that every man here, from the youngest water runner to the oldest sledge captain, holds within him a world, but that world is locked not by force, but by choice. Because here, words are a luxury, a risk, a weight too great for those already bent beneath stone, and so they do not speak, and neither do you. And instead, you learn to listen not with ears, but with skin and breath and the quiet that grows louder the longer. It is honored, and though time loses its edges in that shaded place, the return to work will come. You know this now, and when it does, no bell will ring, no horn will blow, only the soft shift of bodies rising again, as if called by an invisible current, and you will rise with them, not because you were told to, but because the silence has taught you to feel its ending, just as it taught you to enter it. And in that moment, you will understand that rest is not the opposite of work, but part of its rhythm. A pause in a sentence, written in sand and sweat, and that even in stillness, you remain a moving piece in a great design. When the call to rise passes through the shaded awning, not as a shout or bell, but as the slow, ripple-like shifting of bodies, resigning themselves once again to motion, you rise with them. Your limbs still heavy, your skin now a canvas of dried salt and fine sand, and as the workers disperse, each to their accustomed rhythm, you find yourself drifting, not toward the sleds or water jars, but along a path marked by smaller, more precise movements, or where sound is not absent, but quieted, contained within the sharp, deliberate tap of bronze against limestone, and a faint rustle of a stylus scratching lines across a smooth clay surface. And it is here, on the northern edge of the camp, where the sun's reach is softened by a ridge of quarried debris, that the stone cutters dwell, not builders of monuments in their final forms, but the carvers of beginnings. Those who coax meaning from rock and shape eternity with patience measured not in hours, but in breaths. And as you approach, you notice their posture, low and steady, each seated or kneeling beside a block half-shaped, half-born, their chiseled hands wrapped in cloth and their faces drawn inwards, not from pain, but from focus, so pure it excludes the world and you do not speak. For already you have learned that language here is movement and precision, and you watch as one carver, his back curved like the edge of a crescent blade, brushes sand from a shallow groove and leans in to inspect the width of a symbol. Not a letter, not a picture, but something in between. A mark that carries not sound, but significance. And another, younger, perhaps an apprentice, turns his stone over slowly, tracing guidelines with a bit of dyed string pulled taut between two copper pegs, and when he begins to cut, he does so without hesitation, not quickly, but with certainty, each strike landing not with brute force, but with the softness of confidence born from repetition, and the dust rises with every motion, soft and pale and almost fragrant with the heat of the morning sun. And the dust coats their hands and hair and eyes, and yet they do not wipe it away, because here dust is not dirt but ink, the residue of meaning being brought into form. And you sit at a respectful distance, letting the quiet wrap around you, letting your breath sync with the tempo of their art. And as you watch them, you begin to see the outline of a greater order, how each chisel fits a glyph, how each glyph fits a name, and how each name is placed precisely where the architects will one day command it to stand. Not randomly, but with spiritual geometry, aligned to stars and seasons and gods whose names no longer cross your tongue, and you sense, without needing to be told, that these are not mere laborers, but keepers of memory, their stones not bricks, but sentences, their dust not waste, but legacy. And as the sun begins to shift, casting longer shadows across their workspaces, you feel a stillness settle over you, not the stillness of rest, but of reverence. And though you have not touched the stone, you carry its imprint, a sense that to carve is not to destroy, but to reveal, and that every mark in this world, from the smallest chip to the deepest groove, is made not for the eye, but for the soul of the one who will one day pass their fingers along its edge and remember something they never knew they forgot. Beyond the steady rhythm of chisels and the soft breath of stone dust rising into morning light, there is another silence deeper, more focused, more delicate than even the quiet of the carver's silence, held not by the weight of stone, but by the glide of reed and ink upon papyrus. And as your steps carry you further from the heart of labor, drawn by the scent of ink, warmed in clay dishes and the faint crackle of parchment under careful fingers, you find yourself among the scribes, seated cross-legged on low wooden stools beneath a linen awning, held aloft by driftwood poles, their backs straight, their gazes unwavering, in their hands a blur of precision as they bring forth language from nothing, symbols flowing from mind to wrist to page in a rhythm so fluid, so meditative, that it seems as though the ink itself wills the words into being. And there is no noise save for the soft creak of parchment being unrolled, the occasional clink of a stylus being dipped, and the breath of focus that escapes one's lips in small, controlled intervals. And you linger at the edge, cautious, aware now that everything in this place operates on a logic far more ancient and precise than your own. And one scribe, older than the rest, with hair wrapped in linen and eyes clouded but sharp, gestures faintly for you to sit beside him, not close, but within reach hand. You lower yourself onto the warm sand, folding your legs as he unrolls a scroll already half filled with the looping, coiled forms of sacred symbols, some curved like reeds in the river wind, others jagged like lightning split across stone. And he does not speak, does not look at you, but his hand continues, ink flowing from a narrow brush with bristles so fine they tremble with each stroke, and you realize that this is not mere writing, but invocation, each character a breath, each line a binding. And across from him, sits a young apprentice, holding an ivory palette, watching the master as hand with a devotion so complete it is as if the ink moves through him, too, and you glance between them, seeing how centuries pass from one hand to another, not in ceremony or proclamation, but in this silent act of duplication, and the scroll continues to fill. Not hurriedly, but with reverence, names of workers, measurements of stone, dedications to gods whose names burn on the tongue like heat. And for the first time, you begin to feel the shape of memory itself, how it is kept, how it is passed, how it is buried, not in tombs, but in symbols that endure long after breath is gone. And beside you, another scribe lifts a completed scroll and rolls it tight, tying it with thread and sealing it with wax pressed from a signet ring, the symbol of the overseer's hand, and places it in a woven basket lined with linen, as though it was something fragile, something sacred. And as the sun shifts, shadows lengthen beneath the awning, and still the ink flows. Still, the pages fill, and you find yourself tracing the symbols with your eyes, trying to decipher them not with knowledge, but with instinct. And though you understand none of it, you feel their power the way each curve and line holds weight beyond speech. You realize, sitting there in the silence, that words do not require sound to be heard, and memory does not require understanding to be preserved, and that here, among the scribes, truth is written in silence so complete it drowns all forgetting. As the sun begins its descent beyond the low hills of crushed stone and worn desert, the sky turns not to darkness immediately, but to a bronze and violet haze that settles gently upon the camp, softening the edges of tents, tools, and tired shoulders. And in this spended hour, neither work nor rest, neither day nor night, the world seems to hold its breath, and the movements of the laborers become slower, more deliberate, not because the overseers have commanded it, but because the body, that sacred engine of toil, begins to yield. Kiss begins to offer its silence back to the earth, and in this hush, you walk, not with direction, but with the gravity of shared fatigue, through rows of woven shelters and sleeping mats woven from palm fibers, past stacks of chisels and buckets of sanded oil, until you reach the circle, the quiet circle, where flame has been coaxed into being not large, not roaring, but flickering, dancing gently as if aware it is not the star of this evening ritual, but a humble servant, and around it sit the Mindos, whose voices you have never heard, whose names remain unknown, but whose shoulders you have worked beside, whose hands you have seen bloodied and wrapped, whose backs bent with yours beneath the rope hand. They do not speak now either, but sit cross-legged, eyes fixed not on the fire, but on its reflection in the faces of those across from them, and there is no feast, no song, no gesture of celebration. It's only a piece of flat bread passed silently from one hand to another, dipped in oil, eaten slowly, reverently, into a single clay bowl filled with a dark drink, shared and returned, and still no words, not because there is nothing to say, but because everything that needed saying has already been said through movement and sweat and shared breath. And the fire, in its quiet crackle, tells the story instead, the story of the day, of the stone, of the rope, in water and heat. and the way the shadows stretch across each face as the flames dance suggests a history longer than memory. And you sit among them now, not as a stranger, not fully yet as one of them, but as someone who has begun to understand that belonging does not come with welcome, but with endurance. And as the last of the bread is eaten and a bowl placed down in the sand, one man rises not quickly, not to speak, but to walk beyond the circle, past the edge of light, and kneels, facing the desert, his hands folded in front of him, not in prayer you recognize, but in a stillness that carries weight, and others follow, one by one, kneeling at different points of the camp, not aligned, not mirrored, but scattered like stars across the darkening land. And you remain by the fire, watching them. These men who have spent their day in the service of the stone and now offer the silence of their hearts to whatever God listens in the darkness. And it is in this moment that you realize night here is not absence, but presence, reflection of reckoning, of quiet submission. And as your head grows heavy and your limbs begin to fold upon themselves, you know that sleep will not come quickly, not because of discomfort, but because something inside you has shifted. Something has cracked open in the silence and the firelight. And as the last embers flicker and fade and the stars bloom slowly into the sky like old stories being remembered, you lie back upon the earth, and the dust that coated you all day now welcomes you, as blanket, as cradle, as the voice of sleep itself. And though your eyes close, the fire still dances behind them, and the silence sings. Night does not fall here with sudden darkness, but gathers gently, like the slow lowering of a heavy curtain across the face of a weary world. And as the last embers of the fire shrink into quiet glows buried beneath the sand, you lie upon your matted-woven square that crinkles faintly beneath your weight-tan stare, upward into a sky deeper than memory, so wide and endless that it seems to swallow thought itself. And though your eyes grow heavy and your breath slows, sleep does not come all at once, but flows into you gradually, like water into a dry vessel. And as you drift between waking and dreaming, the sounds of the camp fade until only your own breath remains. And then, even that vanishes, replaced by a hush so complete it feels as if you are no longer lying on the earth, but within it, cradled by dust and stone, and the great weight of ages pressing gently but endlessly against your skin. And in this dream, more perhaps it is more than dream, you see the stones, not as lifeless, but as vessels filled with light, not of fire, but of memory. And that light pulses slowly, in time with the beat of a distant drum, or perhaps a heart, and each stone hums with purpose, with names unspoken but known, and you walk among them not as a stranger, but as one who belongs, and the stones shift to make space for you. And you place your hand upon them and feel warmth, not of heat, but of recognition. And when you awaken, the first cool breath of morning brushes across your face, and you are no longer uncertain, no longer wondering where you are or how you came here, because the dream has told you what the day could not, that this is not a place you arrived in, but a place you return to, And though you may not remember your name, your place, or your former life, the earth beneath you does, and it welcomes you not with words, but with the rhythm of the morning soft footsteps in sand, the clink of tools being gathered, the low murmur of bodies stretching awake hand as you rise and brush the dust from your skin. You do not look around with the eyes of an outsider, but with the gaze of one who sees his own shape in the labor of others. And you fold your mat and drink the lukewarm water offered from a shared jar. And when the rope is passed to your hand again, you grasp it without hesitation, not because you were told to, but because it fits now, not just in your palm, but in your being. And as the sun reaches the ridge and the camp stirs to life once more, you move into line, not at the front, not at the back, but exactly where you are meant to be. And the chant begins again, not from your lips, not yet, but from somewhere deeper, and it carries you forward into the day, into the dust, into the memory of the stones. Morning returns, not with drama or trumpet, but with the hush of routine, with the soft shuffle of sandals in sand, the clink of wooden tools being unstacked, and the distant rhythm of water. Jars lifted and carried once again toward stone, and as you fall back into the line, into the chant, into the long breath of motion, you find your thoughts less restless, your limbs more compliant, as if some piece of you has adjusted to this cadence, not by force, but by recognition. And yet today, something pulls at your awareness, something quiet but insistent, a thread among threads, and you follow it, not by wandering, but by watching your gaze drawn to a figure who does not move like the others. Its place is not in the hauling lines or among the chanting ropes, but alone beside a low bench of dark stone in the farthest shadow of the morning sun. And he is old, so much older than the rest, that at first you think he is part of the ruin. Some leftover image from another generation left sitting to watch time pass. But then you see his hands, slow but steady, drawing the edge of a copper blade along the lip of a half-shaped slab with a patience that feels holy. And you stop not to speak, not to interrupt, but to look, and in that looking, you see that he's not carving the way others do, not cutting names or orders or glyphs, but simply working the edge, smoothing it, refining it again and again, as though trying to remember a shape the world has forgotten. Hence, those around him pass without pause, without greeting, as if he is both invisible and immovable. A piece of the place that requires no acknowledgement, and yet he is working, and that work commands attention, not because it is grand or loud, but because it is different, timeless, detached from the urgency that moves everyone else. And you watch as he pauses, lifts a small cloth, wipes his blade, inspects the line of the stone, and begins again. And in this repetition, there is something you cannot name, devotion, perhaps, or grief, or simply rhythm worn into flesh. And the more you observe, the more you feel that he is not shaping the stone, but communing with it, not making something new, but preserving something that already exists beneath its surface. And a laborer beside you mutters under his breath in a tongue you barely know. It's a word that might mean ghost or elder or reminder, and then he moves on, and you remain, caught in the gravity of the old man's presence, unable to pull away. And as the morning deepens and heat begins to rise in shimmering waves off the ground, the old man does not change, does not tire, only pauses now and then to sip from a cracked bowl of water and resumes. And you wonder though, the thought is strange and perhaps not your own if he has been doing this for years, for decades, for lifetimes. And if the stone beneath his blade is the same stone every day, it's never changing, never finished, a companion, a confession. And as your name is called though, you have no name, you rise and return to the line. But the image of the old man remains with you, not like memory, but like a rhythm, as though you have seen not a craftsman, but a clock, marking not hours, but something deeper, older, truer. The next day arrives not with novelty, but with the gentle repetition of all things known, the sun rising where it always rises, the bodies moving in the directions they have always moved, the water poured into the same jars, lifted by the same hands, poured onto the same logs, the chant beginning and folding into the long motion of pulling and placing and pressing. And yet beneath this great, slow tide of sameness, something has shifted in you. A small stone turned beneath the surface, a change not felt by those around you, but known to you intimately. And it is this change that draws your eyes again toward the edge of the worksite, to that same patch of shade where the old man sits beside his stone. And he is there again, just as you feared and hoped he would be, just as fixed, just as deliberate. And you pause again, not long, just long enough for your breath to still land watch as he leans forward, his blade held lightly in his hand, not to cut this time, but to trace, slowly, carefully, with the tip of his fingers, a shape upon the stone surface, a shape so simple that it should vanish in the glare of the day. Okay, and yet it remains one line, then another, then a curve. And though it resembles no glyph you have seen, no hieroglyph pressed into temple walls, no symbol from the scrolls of the scribes, it carries with it the gravity of meaning, the way a name carries memory or a look carries grief. And you realize, without knowing how, that the shape is not meant to be read, but remembered, that it is not a word, but a wound made visible. And the old man, seeing the line completed, does not continue carving, it does not deepen it, but simply looks at it for a long time, as if the shape is speaking to him, or perhaps asking to be heard again. And for a moment, you wonder if he is praying, not with words, but with gesture, with lines drawn into dust and dismissed before they are known. And though others pass him by, some stepping around him with practiced care, no one interrupts, no one questions, and you begin to understand that he is not ignored, but honored in silence, allowed his ritual, because it is older than their tasks, older than the stone itself. Perhaps, and later, when your rope is dropped and your feet are freed from the rhythm of the sled, you drift closer, careful not to disturb, and see that the shape has already faded, brushed away by his own hand, leaving no mark behind. And yet the imprint remains not on the stone, but in you, and it lives behind your eyes for the rest of the day. Okay, and you find yourself tracing it again and again on the inside of your palm, not because you remember it perfectly, but because it does not wish to be forgotten. And as the heat rises and the shadows stretch long and the fire returns again to the center of the camp, you realize that the old man is carving not monuments, not orders, not names for the dead, but something more rare, something that cannot be buried because it does not want to last forever, only to be seen once clearly by one who would understand. The day begins again, as it always does, not with surprise, but with surrender, with bodies folding once more into labor, with the sand warming slowly underfoot, and a chant rising from tired throats as if it never stopped, only paused for breath in the stillness of night. And though your hands grip the rope and your shoulders strain under weight, your mind is not fully in the movement. Now it drifts, it listens inward, returning again and again to the old man and the shape that vanished beneath his palm. And when your work is done for the morning and the jars are emptied and the line released, you walk not to rest but toward him, drawn not by curiosity but by something softer, quieter, something like longing, though you cannot name what for. And today, as you approach, you see him crouched low beside his stone, small vessel of water cradled between his knees, and with a strip of woven cloth, key, dips, and rings, and begins to wipe not in haste, not as if to clean, but with the care of someone revealing someone unburying. And the water darkens, the dust turns it to a muddy paste that he brushes aside with long, slow strokes, and beneath the dull gray surface of the stone, something begins to show itself. Not letters, not marks of labor, but a face just beginning to emerge, soft and weathered and shaped by the most delicate hand. The lips barely suggested, the brow a gentle arch, the eyes closed as if sleeping or remembering, and you do not breathe for fear of disturbing it, for fear it might vanish if acknowledged too soon. And the old man continues, his hands trembling slightly, not from age, but from reverence. And you realize then that this face is not a symbol or a god or a command, is someone real, someone once held, once known. And the care with which he touches each contour tells you that this is not just a memory carved in stone, but a love or a grief, or perhaps both, bound into shape, not for others to see, but for him to preserve. And no one else around seems to notice, perhaps because they have seen it before, perhaps because they cannot see it at all. And you feel, deep within your chest, the ache of recognition, though you have never known the face, have never spoken to the man, and you wonder if this is what it means to carry another as sorrow, not to understand it, not to solve it, but simply to witness it without turning away. And as the last of the dust is wiped clean, and the stone glistens in the morning light, the old man places his hand gently against the cheek, not to smooth it, not to correct it, but simply to hold it for a moment, as one might hold the memory of a voice that will not return. And then, with the same cloth, he covers it again, not to hide, but to protect, and sits beside it in silence, his eyes closed. Now, not in sleep, but in listening, and you sit as well a little ways away, and say nothing because there is nothing to say, because sometimes presence is the only offering that matters, and the only thing that remains. The morning sun returns again, golden and expectant, casting long, amber shadows across the sand that stretch like fingers over the tools and ropes and jars that await the return of the living to their work. And the camp stirs slowly beatus, unfolding from sleep, shoulders flexing back into the old, familiar ache. Voices low and movements habitual, and you move among them now with a strange kind of ease. Not because the work has grown lighter, but because you have become shaped by it, carved into its rhythms like the stones themselves. And yet today, something is wrong, not loud, not broken, but simply still. And as you walk past the line of sleeping mats and turn toward the familiar edge of the site, the shaded place where the old man always sits, always waits, always works, you feel it before you see it, the absence of motion, the break in rhythm, and when your eyes finally reach him, the breath in your chest stills. For he is there, seated as always, legs folded beneath him, the stone before him, the cloth still covering the carved face beneath, but his hands do not move. The vessel of water beside him remains untouched, the blade laid across his lap unmoving, and he stares to nod at you, not at the others, not even at the horizon, but at the stone, his eyes fixed in a quiet that feels heavier than silence. And you approach, slowly, cautiously, as if disturbing him might shatter something too fragile to be named, and you sit a few steps away, as you have done before, and wait, and wait, and wait. But still, he does not move, does not blink. And the camp continues behind your ropes pooled, chants rising, dust swirling, but here, in this small circle of shade, the day has not begun, and the stone rests untouched, and you realize, with a slow and aching clarity, that this is not rest, not pause, but the beginning of farewell, not spoken or announced, but simply unfolding like a shadow across the sand. And you do not know what has changed, whether his strength has left him, or whether something inside him has decided there is nothing left to carve. But you feel the weight of it, the way one feels the weight of a final look or a final breath. And though your instinct is to speak, to ask, to reach out, you do not, because something in the stillness tells you that this moment is not yours to alter, only to witness. And so you sit with him in that unspoken hour, two figures beside a stone that once carried shape and now carries silence, keenness, and as the sun climbs and the air thickens with heat, Kina, the shadows shorten and the light reaches even the deepest corner of the worksite, but he does not move, and you remain beside him, not working, not speaking, not questioning. And in that long, quiet morning, you learn that presence is not measured by action, and that sometimes the most sacred thing a person can do is simply stop. The camp at night is a different world, a softer one, where the harsh lines of the day are blurred into gentle curves by firelight and shadow, and the sounds that rule the daylight stone against stone, chant against silence, are replaced by the hush of bodies settling into earth, the soft sigh of breath in sleep, the occasional rustle of linen mats, or the low cough of a throat long dusted by the desert-esque voice. And though sleep comes easily now, wrapped in exhaustion and silence, tonight something pulls at you, a stirring not of fear, not of discomfort, but of presence, of quiet motion, and your eyes open not with panic, but with knowing, as if you were meant to wake, and as your vision adjusts to the deep dark layered with starlight and the faint red glow of dying coals, you see him not where he always is, not seated, not still, but moving slowly, deliberately, like a shadow, remembering how to walk, and he is alone, walking past the edge of the sleeping mats, past the fire, past the jars and ropes and tents, heading toward the stone, his stone that lies beneath the cloth, and though no words are spoken, you rise and follow, barefoot and silent, the sand cool beneath your feet. And when you reach the edge of the circle, you stop, not daring to step further, not because of fear, but out of reverence, and you watch, hidden by distance and dark, as he kneels before the stone, not slowly this time, but with the sharp motion of a man surrendering not to weakness, but to memory, and with one careful motion, he peels back the cloth, revealing the face once more, and in the moonlight it glows, not like stone, but like flesh remembered in the darkness, and he looks at it, long and deeply, and you cannot see his face, but you know from the weight of the moment that he is not seeing stone, but someone. And though there are no tears, no sounds, the grief is thick, heavy in the air, pressed between them like a second sky. And then, after what feels like hours, or no time at all, he lifts a small jar, dipped from the well perhaps, and weights the cloth again, and wipes gently, not to clean, not to restore, but to say goodbye. And when the face is damp and shimmering in the moonlight, he leans forward and places his forehead against it, not quickly, not ceremonially, but with the intimacy of farewell, and holds there, breathing slowly, his back rising and falling like the chest of the earth itself. And then, with one final breath, he lifts a pinch of sand from the ground beside him and lets it fall across the damp stone, watching it cloud the features, skewer the lines, and another, until the face is gone, not violently, not erased, but returned, given back to the silence from which it came, and he replaces the cloth, not with precision now, but with trembling hands, as though the act costs him something vital, and then he sits, just as he always has, beside the stone, in silence, in darkness, and you remain still, unseen, unspoken, and yet you feel as though you have been invited to witness something sacred, something older than prayer. And as you return to your mat, your legs shaking with the weight of what you've seen, you do not lie down immediately, but stare into the sky and understand, without needing explanation, that something has ended. Something else, perhaps mourning, perhaps remembering, has just begun. Morning comes, as it always does, with the first light peeling gently across the sand, slipping between the quiet tents and across the shoulders of those still caught in the breath between dreams and waking. And for a moment, you think perhaps the night was only a vision, a fragment of sleep woven too closely into memory, but then you rise, and the weight in your chest reminds you that it was not dream, that the man you watched say goodbye beneath the stars had done so not for the stone, not for the face beneath it, but for you, so that someone would remember. And as the camp slowly comes alive with the usual motions, bodies stretching, mats being folded, ropes gathered, and chants murmured, you turn, almost without thought, and begin walking toward the shaded place at the edge of the site where he has always sat, And though your breath is steady, your heart is not, and you already know before you arrive, before the dust warms beneath your feet, that he is gone. And yet still you look, still you search, still you hope for some trace. And when you arrive, you find the stone exactly as it was, the cloth still covering the face, the vessel of water still sealed, the blade laid across the bench as if it might be used again, but there is no sign of him, no sandal print, no shifted sand, no gesture of parting, and you sit slowly, as clear as if he might yet return and resume his quiet work, and the others pass by, carrying jars and baskets and ropes. And though some glance in your direction, none stop, none speak, none ask where he is, and that silence, more than his absence, confirms it. They know, or perhaps they've known all along, that one morning he would not return, and that his departure would not need explanation. And so the day begins as it always has, as though nothing has changed, and yet everything has. And as the sun climbs and the work resumes and the chants rise once more into the heat, you remain beside the stone, not in grief exactly, but in something quieter, something deeper in understanding that what he gave you was not a lesson, not a story, but a rhythm, and that rhythm now beats within you, silent and steady. And though you do not lift the cloth again, do not disturb the final covering he placed there with such care, you feel the face beneath it, not with your fingers, but with memory, and that is enough. And when your name is called not with sound, but with the tug of duty, you rise, not because the work demands it, okay, but because the rhythm continues, and you have become part of it now, okay. And as you walk back into the dust and the chanting and the endless pool of the rope, okay, the shaded place remains behind you, empty, quiet, sacred, and whole. The day stretches long and wide, the way only days shaped by absence can. And though your hands move and your feet obey the rhythm, there is something inside you that resists the sun, something that lingers in shadow, tethered not to the task at hand, but to the memory of hands now gone. And as the dust rises and the voices of men form their chanting current once more, you feel the space he has left, not as a wound, not even as grief, but as silence, a deep, old silence that does not ache, but settles like fine powder upon everything, upon breath, upon thought, upon time itself. And as the morning stretches toward its peak and the heat presses heavy upon your skin, you find your path drifting slowly, as if pulled by gravity, not your own back, toward the stone, toward the quiet space where nothing now moves. And when you reach it, there is no surprise, only the confirmation of what you already carry, that he will not return, that the shape of his presence will remain only in this stillness. And yet you kneel not to search, not to call, not even to remember, but to place something down, something small, something meaningless to others, but deeply sacred to you, a pebble, round and dull, plucked from the path where the ropes drag heavy through the sand each day, where it had been crushed and scattered by feet and wheels, and now held briefly in your palm. It feels warm, as if it has listened, as if it knows, and you place it at the base of the stone knot in ceremony, not in offering, but in rhythm, continuing what began with the line he once drew in dust. What deepened with the face he revealed in secret. What concluded in the silence he left behind. When the stone touches the ground, it makes no sound, and yet the moment echoes through you like thunder in a sealed chamber. And you rise, not lighter, not heavier, but change, not in spirit, but in gaze. And as you return to the others, your hands on a rope once more, your body folding back into work, you carry him with you, not as memory, but as movement in your eyes. Catch the edges of stone with new reverence, and you begin to notice shapes where before there were only surfaces, sea lions in dust that speak more than words. And though no one around you says his name, though his story is not written in scrolls or carved into temple walls, you know that it endures, carried in your breath, held in your fingers, etched now not into stone, but into you. Time does not pass here in hours, but in dust settling slowly on shoulders, on tools, on memorand, though the days blur into one another with the grace of repetition. There are moments when the rhythm of sameness gives way to something else, something softer, something new that feels ancient. And today is such a day, though it begins like all others with the chant low and steady, with the ropes stretching taut against the bodies that guide them, and you among them, your hands rough now, your breath paced, your gaze steady, but inside you something stirs, not a thought, not a dream, but emotion, as if your bones remember something your mind has not yet caught up to. And when the midday sun rests heavy upon your back and the call is given for pause, you do not drink immediately, do not sit or shade yourself, but walk quietly, without direction toward one of the smaller stones left untouched at the far edge of the worksite. A stone not assigned, not spoken for, and you kneel before it, not with intent, but with curiosity, and without knowing why. You lift a small, flat shard of copper discarded, perhaps, or forgotten, and you touch its edge to the surface of the stone and draw, slowly, not with skill, not with force, but with wonder. And what emerges is not a name, not a figure, not even a pattern, just a line, then another, an arc, a pause, a return, though you do not know what it is. You know that it comes not from you, but through you, and it feels not like creation, remembering, and you trace it again, gently deepening it, not to preserve it, but to understand it, and as you sit back and breathe, the line shimmering in the heat, you feel a presence not loud, not looming, but near. You glance up to see a boy, younger than you, standing a short distance away, watching, not with judgment, not with fear, but with wide eyes and stillness. And he says nothing, does not move. But when you return your gaze to the stone, he steps closer, just enough to see the shape you've drawn, and sits, not beside you, but near enough to see, near enough to learn. And you say nothing, because you do not yet know what this is, only that it must be passed on. And as the sun moves slowly westward, and the sounds of labor rise again behind you, you both remain there for a time, two figures in silence, joined not by task, but by rhythm. And when you finally rise and return to the others, he remains, staring at the shape. And you do not look back, but you feel the echo of the old man's rhythm behind you. ahead of you, within you, and you know now that what he carved into stone was never meant to last, but to continue. There are places even the wind avoids, corners of the camp where the dust gathers deeper, where the stone lies uneasy beneath the sun, and though no words are ever spoken about them, the body knows, the breath knows. Step slow before crossing to near land. It is in such a place that your day begins. Not by intention, not by plan, but by redirection. As a new load of stone, misaligned and misjudged, must be pulled not along the usual path, but through a narrow cut of earth bordered by forgotten markers and faint walls buried to their shoulders in sand. And when you and the others arrive, the silence thickens. Not heavy, not fearful, but wary, like the breath held before stepping into water too dark to see through, and the foreman, too tired to care, orders the rope down, and the stones must be shifted by hand. And as you kneel, fingers digging to find leverage beneath the weight, your hand catches not rough stone, but smooth curve, something polished by time rather than chisel, and you pull it free, a fragment of something once whole. Once shaped its surface, carved with lines so fine they shimmer under the sun like threads of shadow, and you pause, and others do too, and for a moment no one moves. The fragment balanced in your palm, like a question that does not wish to be answered. And someone mutters a word you don't know, sharp and hushed, and steps back. And another follows, and soon it is only you, kneeling there with this thing in your hand, this memory of something buried too long. And the foreman curses under his breath, tells you to throw it aside, to keep moving, but his voice is thin, as if spoken from behind a wall of sand, and you cannot take your eyes from the shard, because the lines upon it are not like the ones the old man carved. Not soft, not reverent, but frantic, tangled, coiled like vines around a shape too broken to see clearly. And when you touch its center, your skin chills, not from cold, but from something older than cold. And the sand beneath your knees shifts, collapses slightly, revealing the faint outline of a circle, a ring of stone buried just beneath the surface, and one of the older men sees it and turns away, muttering again, crossing himself in a gesture not found in temples. And the foreman says nothing now, only steps back and spits, and tells you all to move around, to leave it, to bury it again with steps and silence. But something inside you is still caught, held, not by fear, but by recognition. And though you obey, though you follow the others as the rope is reattached and the chant returns like wind forced through tight stone, you glance back once more and you see it, the ring, the circle, the shape that does not belong, and in your palm, the shard still warm with its memory, the lines humming softly, a tune that feels like breathing backward through time. The night wraps itself around the camp like a breath held too long, heavy with heat that has not yet lifted, with silence thick enough to muffle the memory of chants and footsteps. And though your body begs for rest, your mind does not release the shape of what you saw, does not let go of the shard that burned cold in your palm, of the circle buried just beneath the skin of the sand, of the way the others stepped back without needing to ask why, and long after the last fire dims and the last whisper fades, You rise, not with purpose, but with compulsion, your feet moving as if led by some thread of rhythm deeper than decision. And you walk the path not taken, past the jars, past the sleds, into the place where the stone grew quiet, where the air seemed to hesitate. And though you expect the space to look different by moonlight, it does not, if anything. It looks more itself, the edge is sharper, the ring of stone more visible, the pattern in the sand less disturbed, and when you step into its boundary, something within you shivers. Not from fear, but from reverence, the way a temple makes you whisper without needing to, and you kneel, brush aside the thin layer of wind-swept sand, and see them symbols carved not by chisel, but by fingertips, shallow, crude, but full of intent, twisted and mirrored versions of signs you've seen in temples, but older, less refined, more urgent, as if made not to be read, but to be heard. And as you stare, the silence around you changes, no longer absence, but presence, a quiet filled with weight. And you feel the earth beneath your knees, breathing, or dreaming, or remembering, and then, not as a sound, but as a shape behind your eyes, you feel it, a name, not spoken, not known, but pressing outward from within, syllables without voice, meanings without language, and it is not calling you, not summoning, but waiting, as though it has been waiting forever for someone to kneel here, to see the lines, to feel the name, and you do not speak, cannot speak, but your breath quickens, your chest tightens, and your hands tremble not from fear, but from recognition, from the overwhelming sense that this place was never lost, only hidden, buried, not by time, but by will, by those who did not want to remember. Now you have remembered, not by choice, but by rhythm, by the shape of a shard, by the circle in the sand. And when you finally rise, your knees stiff, your heart echoing with something not entirely your own, you leave no mark, speak no word, only return to your mat, and lie down with eyes wide open, and dream not of the old man, not of the face beneath the cloth, but of the circle and the name, and the feeling that something has begun again that was never truly ended. The days continue, but they no longer feel linear, no longer carry the clean rhythm of work and rest, sun and shade, rope and stone. Something beneath the surface of your life has tilted, cue imperceptibly at first, but now undeniable, as if the soul itself hums with a language that only your bones understand. And though you return to the chant, return to the labor, the rope feels thinner in your grip, the dust softer beneath your feet, and at night your dreams are no longer empty, no longer restful. Now they come shaped like whispers, like winds that know your name, though no voice speaks it aloud. And you see the circle again and again, drawn not by hand, but by flame across the sky of your mind, and always at the center, the same unfixed symbol changing as you watch, shifting as you understand, not in defiance of meaning, but in excess of it, as if the symbol holds too many truths to remain still. And then you wake, breath shallow, the night silent around you, except for the scratching, the faint rasp of motion too close. And when you sit up, you find your own hand moving across the dirt, fingers tracing symbols into the ground beside your mat. The shapes half-formed, incomplete, but familiar. And though your mind had not willed them, your hand remembers, and you wipe them away quickly, heartbeat rising, not out of shame, but to protect them, as though they are secrets not meant for the eyes of others. And yet, in the following days, you find them again on the inside of your palms, drawn faintly with charcoal while half asleep on the side of your water jar, traced with fingertip in morning condensation, in the dust beside your sandals, where your heel must have moved without thought, and still you say nothing. And yet you are not alone in your silence, because others have noticed, not the young, who sleep too deeply, but the older men, the ones with hollow cheeks and eyes that no longer seek the horizon. And one morning, as you pass by with a bucket of water, one of them lifts his gaze not fully, not sharply, but just enough for your steps to slow, and his eyes fall to the smudge of a symbol left on your forearm. Faint from sleep, and he says nothing, only nods once, barely perceptible, and turns away. And in that gesture, there's no warning, no fearingly recognition, like the passing of a torch without flame. And you understand then that what is awakening in you is not possession, not madness, but memory, a memory older than your name, older than your blood. And that these symbols, these shapes that emerge from your sleep, are not new, not yours, but old echoes returned to breath through your hands. And though others around you carry stone and chant their days away without noticing, a few more of the older ones begin to glance your way, not out of alarm, but out of quiet understanding. And none approach you, none ask, none speak canned yet, in the way they do not speak. You know they have drawn these shapes too, long ago, and perhaps even now, in their dreams, their fingers still remember. The morning begins like so many others, sun rising, soft and gold, casting long pale fingers across the ropes and jars, and men chanting, not out of joy, but out of habit, their voices weaving the day together, one breath at a time, and you are among them, body bent into motion, arms hardened by repetition, that your hands loosen slightly from the rope and your eyes widen without your permission. And as the sled grinds to a halt and the others murmur, someone steps forward and wipes the surface with their sleeve, and his shape becomes clearer, sharper, unmistakable. Okay. Mind floating somewhere between stone and sky, and as the sled jerks forward, its load heavy with newly cut blocks, but desperate, and though the others scoff, spit, curse, some crossing their chests or muttering words from temples far away, you do not speak, for the weight in your chest has grown too great. He does not want questions. He does not want to be the one to see. But you see, and you cannot unsee, and even as your feet return to the dust path and your hands retake the rope, your mind stays behind, circling the outcrop, wondering who else had dreamed these lines, who had carved them, how long ago, and why here, why now. And your hands are trembling, and it is not fear, it is recognition, again and again, and something else, continuation. But because something is watching from within you, some part of you waiting for more, listening to the breath between dreams, hoping the next night will show you not just symbols, but the hand that made them, The rope cuts into your palms the way it always does. This was left behind, not as decoration, not as warning, but as message. A message from someone like you. Someone who remembered. Someone who knew this symbol might matter again. And you do not notice the shift in path at first. Do not question the slight turn down a less traveled slope until the chanting falters for a moment, not from your throat, but from those behind you, and you glance up and see it, a large outcrop of stone, long ignored, half buried in the side of a shallow incline, just beyond the usual roots, now exposed by wind or time or something more subtle. And there, just above eye level, not deeply carved, but clearly etched, is the symbol. Not exactly the one from your dreams. Not identical, but close enough that your breath stops, that your step hesitates. It is one of yours, but not made by you. The lines are shallow, rushed, cut without precision, as though carved in the dark in haste, with a hand not trained. Because this symbol, this version, raw and urgent, is older than your memory, but newer than the ones in your sleep. The foreman orders the group to move on, voice rough, gaze averted. And when the day's work ends and the sun folds itself back into the hills, you do not sleep, not because you cannot. The night is thick and still, heavy with the breath of buried stone and the low pulse of silence that settles over the camp when the last whisper fades and even the wind grows shy. And you sleep not deeply, but with the weight of dreams pressing like slow waves against the edge of waking hand. When morning comes, it does not come as it usually does, not with the distant sound of shifting jars or the scrape of rope, but with a hush, a quiet so complete it feels like someone has draped the air itself in linen. And when you open your eyes, it is not the sun you see first, but the ground around you, not because you've drawn them, but because you've dreamed them. And you trace one with your fingertip, a spiral nested within a broken circle, the very shape you had dreamed only nights ago, although it crumbles under your touch. The air remains thick, heavy with presence, and you glance around, because they live now in your breath, in your palms, in the space behind your eyes where names once lived and have since disappeared. Symbols, dozens of them, drawn into the dust all around your mat, some shallow, some bold, some crisp as if etched moments ago, others half faded like echoes of older hands. Cola, all of them familiar. He only meets your eyes once, and in that glance is a confirmation, a blessing, a warning, and then he walks on, not disrupting the dust, not stepping too close. You rise at last slowly and step between them as though crossing a river made not of water but of time. Not a single mark to show who might have knelt here, who might have drawn them, who might have known how. And morning routines, you remain still, surrounded by the lines in the dust, unwilling to destroy them with even a single careless movement. And you feel watched, not by eyes, but by memory, by presence, by a consciousness older than the stones you drag each day. You sit up slowly, breath held, afraid to disturb them, afraid to lose the way they hold the light. No one. The rhythm you feel in your bones, the name that beats behind your teeth, the shapes that rise unbidden in your fingers, all of it echoes from a source still pulsing, still near. No footprints, no windswept paths across the symbols, but someone has. Someone or something has come in the night and left these not as messages, but as acknowledgments. You are not alone. You have never been alone. And though the others begin to stir slowly, lazily, the usual muttering of aching joints, one of the elders passes by, pauses briefly, and sees the symbols, but says nothing. And when the sun is high enough that the lines begin to lose their clarity, folding back into sand, you do not speak of them. No one does, but they remain just beneath the surface, waiting for night to rise again. The sun sits high, casting long, crisp shadows against the dry stone walls that frame the far end of the camp. A place rarely walked, rarely mentioned, where tools are never stored and ropes never pass, where even the wind seems reluctant to stir. This one is crooked, leaning slightly, as if placed in haste or rebellion, and there is no incense at its base, no offerings, no wreaths of dried herbs or slips of linen with names scrawled in charcoal. No one has touched it, no one honors it, and today your task leads you there not by plan, not by command, but by circumstance. A broken wheel on a supply sled, a diversion from the usual rhythm, and as you guide it off the main path with another worker trailing behind, you feel it again, that strange tightness in the air, your hands lowering instinctively, not in fear, but in reverence. And when you reach the far side, the mark becomes clearer, catching a sliver of angled sunlight. It is carved deeper than most you've seen, not with elegance, but with force. Someone wanted it to stay, to endure time and sand and silence, the hush that wraps itself around breath. That way, the dust feels different beneath your sandals, finer, older. It's watching, and you round the bend and see it. The standing stone, not tall, not grand, not marked like the others you have seen near the tombs of honored men or the pillars set for noble builders. And yet, it stands, and on its back, facing the cliff wall, almost hidden from sight you see it. You trace them with your eyes, and they shift not in movement, but in meaning, as if they are not meant to be understood all at once, but unfolded slowly, like memory, like breath. The symbol, faint, weathered, but unmistakable. One of the ones you dreamed. One of the ones that now lives in your fingers. You move slowly, stepping around the stone, one that left behind a mark not to mourn, but to warn. And below it, smaller symbols cluster, swirling outward like echoes from a name too large to speak aloud, but a signal, flicker of presence that still breathes under the stone. The worker with you says nothing. He stops a few paces back, refusing to follow you closer, not because none is needed, but because no words have yet been taught to carry the weight of what you've seen. He looks at the stone and then away, his jaw clenched not with anger, but with something older and unease, born not of ignorance, but recognition. He will not speak aloud. When you ask, gently, what this stone is, he only mutters, "It's not for us," and turns back, kneeling, not daring to touch the mark itself, but feeling its weight. This was a grave once, but not a grave for a noble, not for a priest or a mason, or even a forgotten servant. This was something else, a burial the others refused to acknowledge, one that memory avoided. And yet, in your bones, you do not feel warned. You feel called, as though the one buried here was not meant to be forgotten, not truly, and the symbol is not a threat. As the day draws on and the sun shifts, you rise, walking backward away from the grave, and say no prayer. But one day, perhaps, you will carve your own mark beside it. And maybe then, it will answer. That night's sleep comes slowly like a tide, resisting the shore, your limbs heavy from the day's labor, but your mind adrift, circling the stone that stood in silence, the symbol, carved deep into its spine, like a truth too dangerous to face in daylight. And though the camp grows still around you, and the distant hum of insects rises with the stars, you do not drift gently into rest. You fall into it suddenly, as though pulled below the surface by unseen hands, and when your eyes close, the dream finds you. Not with visions, not with color, but with soundless shadow, a space shaped like memory, familiar, yet unformed, and there is sand beneath your feet, warm and unmoving, and before you where the grave once stood, there is only the earth smooth and untouched. No stone, no mark, no symbol, and yet you know exactly where you are, and your chest tightens with a recognition deeper than fear. You kneel, not because something compels you, but because the ground itself seems to exhale, a breath rising upward into your bones. And the air thickens not with heat, not with cold, but with presence, as though something buried is stretching beneath the soil, not to emerge, but to speak. And then it does, not with words, not even with voice, not to protect the living, but to silence the dead, but with thoughts shaped like pressure, like the feeling just before thunder. You remembered, I was the god of the line drawn in silence, the mark made in shadow, the memory carved where none would see. It does not say it, you know it. They covered me. The words unfold like smoke behind your ribs, and your breath catches not in terror, but in awe. You press your hand to the soil, and the soil presses back. I was not a god of grain, not of stars, tea, not of flood or sun. You want to ask its name, but there is none. There was one once, but it was buried too. Its name is now a feeling, a rhythm, a symbol that has passed from hand to hand, dream to dream, carried in silence across time until it reached you. But with calm, the kind that settles after a storm has passed miles away, but still bends the trees. You were not chosen. You were remembered. The thought strikes deep, not a gift, not a burden, but a continuity. You feel something pass from the ground into you, like heat through stone, like water through clay. Not a vision, but an inheritance. The God is, that is what it is, does not rise, does not ask for devotion, does not demand temples or chants, only remembrance, only the drawing of lines where silence once ruled. And as the dream fades and the earth releases your hand, you wake not with sweat, not with panic. And though you do not speak of it, the next day your fingers move differently, more certain, more quietened. When you pass by the forgotten grave again, you nod once, and the dust stirs at your feet. Though there is no wind, the days stretch onward, the work continuing, to chant returning each morning like the tide constant, measured in different hand. Yet, for you, something has changed, not in the rhythm of your body, but in the silence of your gaze. For though you still walk among the others, still carry water, still pull rope and move stone, not for instructions, but for the pulse beneath the dust, the breath that rises from the earth only when no one is speaking. Your hands no longer draw, your fingers no longer reach instinctively for the shapes they once carved into sand and cloth and thought itself. Now you simply watch. And in that silence, something begins to shift, not within you, but around you. You wake before the others and sit beside the edge of the camp near the broken stone where the circle was first revealed. And you listen not for voices, the way you touch the stone, not as a worker touches it, but as a listener might. He says nothing, but begins to rise earlier each day, until you are no longer alone in those pre-dawn hours. You do not speak anymore, not because you are forbidden, but because there is nothing to say that would not diminish what you now carry. Her gaze finds yours across the sand, and she nods once, slowly, as if remembering something she thought long buried. You see them hesitate before stepping across certain lines in the sand. You see them glance at the stones, not as tools, but as keepers of things not yet spoken. At first, it is a child, one of the water bearers, who lingers near you in the early morning, eyes wide, uncertain, watching the way you sit without moving, the way your gaze does not wander. Then another woman, older than you, her hands calloused, her back bent by years of lifting pauses by the gravestone one evening, and, thinking herself unseen, kneels briefly, not in prayer, but in recognition. And then others, not many, but something has passed between you, a memory, a rhythm, a presence, and you recognize each other, not by word, but by silence. But enough. You see them pause, mid-task, eyes drifting toward a mark in the dirt no one else notices. None of you speak of it. There are no meetings, no rituals, no plans. One night, you wake to find your hands covered in dust, and you let it carry the silence of your knowing into every corner. You have not moved, but the symbol has returned. It's not drawn by you, but by someone else gently at the base of your mat. A perfect spiral, a line crossed only once. It is not a message, it is a reply. The forgotten God, if it was a God, is not alone now, and neither are you. The wind returns that night, soft and low, weaving through the camp like a hush shared among sleepers. The stones will remember. The earth will remember. And now others will too. The sun rises different, here softer, higher, Tia, and yet somehow further away, though the air itself has changed. Filtered through hands that never touch stone, through linens soaked in perfume and shaded by gold. And you walk among the higher tiers now, no longer dragging ropes or lifting dust from half-formed walls, but moving between smooth corridors lined with purpose, between the polished edges of power, and nothing feels real, not like it did below, not like it did with the chant and the sweat and the circle carved into the sand, because here, the shadow of the upper platforms, where the stone is set, not by labor, but by command. The silence is different, colder, cleaner, the kind that does not whisper truths, but swallows them. You were brought up not by promotion, not by merit, but because something moved through the hands of those who noticed, And now your duties are quieter, bringing water to the overseers, moving tools not yet dulled, brushing dust from the spaces where decorations will one day be etched not with meaning, but with memory scripted by scribes who never touched the dead. The Pharaoh's tomb is being prepared, vast and perfect, the walls straight as judgment, the rooms wide enough to confuse echo with presence, and everywhere the echo of absence follows your steps. No one speaks of the Pharaoh. Not really. They speak of his name, of his titles, of his son-born lineage. Okay. But no one speaks of him. No one dares. And yet his image is everywhere carved in postures of divinity, in positions that no man can hold for long, in perfect profile, always with the same unmoving expression, as if to smile would be to shatter the illusion. Their hands move precisely, like extensions of the stone itself, and when one drops a tool, it is not picked up with haste, it is replaced as though it had ceased to exist, and you feel its gaze press upon your neck like heat, but you do not look up. You've learned not to. You pass one of these figures now, taller than 3 men, etched into the wall with gold leaf gathering in its eyes, not because it is forbidden, but because the silence around it is too thick. God on earth is not a man here, it's too sharp. The other workers here do not hum, they do not mutter, they do not look at one another. Once dreamer of symbols, once listener to the earth, now walk among those who have no dreams at all. You wonder not what lies beneath, but what has been buried in the silence above. You begin to understand something the lower tiers never taught you, that at the top, the gods are not worshipped. They are managed, presented, controlled into Pharaoh. He is an idea, one that no one dares interrupt, not even death, KU, or if they do, they never wake from them. And for the first time, the chamber is colder than the air outside, though no breeze stirs within its walls. And the stone beneath your feet is so smooth it gives no sound when you step, when you move, as though the space itself refuses to acknowledge the presence of those not carved from golden. You are here, not by request, not by error, but by direction from a man who did not speak. Your name only pointed once, and you obeyed, because those who dwell above do not speak twice, and now you stand before low altar behind a curtain of linen veils, and beyond them, resting upon a carved platform of black basalt, lies the mask. It is not worn. It has never been worn. It waits, resting in a cradle of linen, cushioned as though even the weight of itself might crack the stone beneath. The mask of the Pharaoh, solid gold, shaped to his features, though you wonder if any man has features so smooth, so hollow, so absent. The eyes are not inlaid with lapis, not polished with resin. They are open spaces, blank, not unfinished, but uninhabited. And when you step closer, unsure if you are even permitted to look, you find yourself drawn into those hollow sockets, drawn as if by gravity, by hunger, not for power, but for understanding. And you see it. Nothing. Not darkness, not mystery, but because the machine of the kingdom says he must be divine, but nothing. Not the kind that waits to be filled, but the kind that was emptied long ago. Emptied of meaning, emptied of name. This mask will one day be lowered onto the face of a man who has not spoken to a servant in years, who is worshipped not because he breathes. And here, at the edge of that machine, the mask rests, silent, gleaming, empty. You want to reach out, not to touch, but to see if the gold is warm, if it remembers the fire that birthed it. But you do not move, because something deeper than fear holds you still. It is not forbidden. It is simply hollow. And suddenly, the memory of the symbols returns to you, not carved in gold, not etched into limestone, but drawn in dust by fingertips, guided by dreams. You remember the grave that no one visits, the circle buried in the sand, the whisper from the earth that knew your name. And here, in this chamber of silence and shine, you understand something terrible and true. That power does not listen. It only reflects. And the Pharaoh's mask, for all its splendor, sees nothing, knows nothing, dreams nothing. It is not a symbol. It is a wall, a perfect, polished wall between meaning and memory. You step back, and though no one sees, and though no one hears, you feel the symbols stir beneath your skin again, not out of fear, but out of longing. Longing for what was lost, longing for what was buried, not by sand, but by silence. The corridor curves like a serpent, smooth and narrow, its walls lined with faint golden flecks that catch the light like distant stars behind gauze. And as you follow, it bends, silent and summoned. You arrive at a doorless threshold, behind which flickers a light too steady to be fire lamps of scented oil, placed in quiet alcoves, casting long, gentle shadows across the walls. And what those shadows touch is not stone, not text, not hieroglyphs meant to instruct or honor, but image. Paintings, dozens, never blinking, never breaking. Gaze from the divine symbols they offer to gods with faces of falcon and jackal, ibis and bull. Perhaps hundreds, figures larger than life, walking in processions that never end, arms outstretched in the same frozen gestures. Their eyes always in profile. You step into the room, and the scent strikes you first, not of dust or sweat, but of pigment ground in oil, of resin, of something floral placed to cover decay. Then the silence, that unique quiet only found in places where too many people once whispered, and now no one dares breathe. The artists do not look at you. They crouch in silence, bent over pallets and plaster, their brushes steady, their hands trained not in creativity, but in obedience. They do not imagine, they replicate. Every stroke follows a guide, every color prescribed, every figure placed precisely where the priest architect ordered it be. There is no room for mistake, and no room for truth. You move closer to the wall, drawn by a procession of figures carrying jars of incense. Their feet mid-step forever, their gazes fixed on an altar that will never bernard you. Realize something unsettling. None of them have shadows. Not one. No shading behind the ankles. No dark beneath their robes. Even the gods they serve cast no weight against the painted world. These are not memories. They are illusions, lies given shape and color, and yet so perfect, so exact. The paint is fresh, the images immortal, but nowhere do you see the symbol. Not one, not scratched into a background corner, not hidden in the curl of a god's staff. The line, the circle, the name that was never spoken belonged not to this world of perfection and permanence, but to the dust, to the forgotten, to the ones who who carved with fingers, not brushes, not buried in the hem of a painted robe. In one painter, an older man with cracked fingernails and pigment stains across his wrist glances toward you not sharply, not in alarm, but in something like wariness. These walls are blind to it, or worse, they removed it, scraped it clean before the plaster dried. And with that thought comes a terrible clarity that the symbol, you step back slowly, you hold his gaze for a moment, okay? And in that gaze you see a flicker of recognition, a flicker that says, I too have drawn it, okay, blind and shadowless, forever walking toward gods who no longer speak. Not here, not with brush, but once, somewhere, long ago. And then he looks away, and the figures on the walls continue their procession. It is evening when they summon you not with command, not with urgency, but with a single gesture. Subtle and quiet, the kind that moves through corridors like a breeze no one sees and you follow, not knowing why, your feet brushing over polished stone and sandals to clean for dust to cling to. And the hallway grows wider with each step, brighter, more perfumed, until at last it opens not into a room, but into a world of silence disguised as splendor. The Hall of Feasts, in carnelian, lapis, and obsidian, every surface polished to reflect light and face and gesture, but none of them your own. A chamber so vast it seems to breathe, its ceiling lost in shadowed heights above, its walls inlaid with gold. You are not alone. Nobles are gathered in silence, draped in linen too fine for sweat, their eyes outlined in kohl, their mouths still, their bodies posed in angles of ease, too perfect to be real. Musicians stand at the corners, their harps and flutes held but not played. Their fingers rest gently against strings, but do not pull. Their mouths hover near flutes, but do not breathe. In the center, a long table stretches beneath the hanging oil lamp's fruit piled high. Bread folded in spiral shapes, jugs of wine and honey water untouched, meat still steaming, figs still wet, everything perfect and nothing disturbed, vacant, obedient to the moment, and you understand then that this is not a feast. You walk slowly, unnoticed, as though you are a shadow moving through a painting, and you look into the faces of the seated each. Once serene, it is a display, not for joy, not for nourishment, but for order. Each man and woman plays a role, not as guest but as mirror. They reflect the wealth of the Pharaoh, not by consuming it, but by being still beside it. And then you see Itat, the far end of the table, on a raised platform, set beneath a canopy of embroidered gold, his seat, okay? The Pharaoh's throne, set with lapis, lions, and winged symbols of divine sun, but untouched. And yet, his presence weighs heavier than if he sat there. You understand why no one eats, because he is not there to watch. And if he is not there to watch, then the purpose of the feast is incomplete. It is not a meal, it is a shrine not to gods, but to power, to order held so tightly that even hunger must bow to it. You feel your own stomach twist not from lack of food, but from the weight of all that is false here. The bread is real, the wine is real, but the hunger is not allowed to be. And in that realization, your memory drifts downward again to the camp, to the chanting of morning, to the cracked palms of those who pulled stone with you, and you remember the shared meals, dry and hard and quiet, but eaten. Truly eaten. You remember hands breaking bread, not to display, but to live. And in that moment, you understand the truth of power here, that those above do not feast. They stage the memory of feasting, 'cause true hunger is too wild, too real, it's too sacred to be witnessed by those who believe they are gods. And so they starve in silence, surrounded by food that will never be touched, in music that will never play. It is near the end of the day, the sun bending low across the stone horizon, when you are sent on a small, erring, meaningless in task, but heavy in direction, to deliver a set of scrolls to one of the record keepers who works behind the inner chambers, where light is scarce and voices are kept soft, lest they disturb the words already written. And you move carefully the bundle of rolled papyri, bound in linen, their tips darkened with soot and oil, names and inventories and praises, no doubt inked with care by scribes who never saw the places they wrote of. The hall is narrow, the walls lined with shelves of reed and linen and clay. And as you pass, a breeze not from wind, but from movement brushes your arm, and something falls. Just one scroll, just one among thousands, but it lands without sound, as if it meant to fall. You kneel, you pick it up. Its casing is cracked, worn thin with age, and as your fingers brush its edge, the linen tie slips free, and the scroll unrolls slightly, not enough to reveal its length, but just enough to show a line, a paragraph, a whisper that has waited too long. The ink is faded. The hand that wrote it was careful, steady, but not decorative, not for show. It is older than the other scrolls. You can feel it. And there, near the top where a name should be, there is instead a space, a deliberate blank, centered, bold, a place once carved with identity, now scrubbed clean, not with error, but with purpose. And beside it, drawn not with flourish, but with solemnity, you see it, the symbol, not drawn as a seal, not placed as a margin note, spiral enclosed in a circle, split once with a line, the symbol you dreamed, the symbol carved in stone, here written in ink, but no name, no designation, no title. The scroll continues below with phrases you half understand. He who was before language. The line beneath the breath, whose name was removed for balance to remain, and your eyes sting, not from the age of the writing, but from the ache of knowing. This is not fiction. This is memory. You did not take it, but your fingers remember. Someone once knew the name, K, and someone chose to erase it. Not to forget, because names can be broken, names can be corrupted, but symbols, they pass hand to hand, dream to dream, even in silence, even in sleep. You roll the scroll gently, you return it to its shelf. Your breath remembers. And that night, you do not dream, not because the symbol is gone, but because it has entered you fully now, and no dream is needed. you are awake. The news does not come with trumpets, nor with weeping, nor with the clang of bronze gongs echoing down the pyramid's flanks. It comes quietly, folded into the breath of a servant brushing past you with lowered eyes, her linen hem dusted with garden sand. And the words she whispers are not even meant for you, but they catch in the air between you both like smoke. The Pharaoh is dead. You do not react, because no one around you does. The stones do not shift. The air does not tremble. A quiet has settled. No torch is dimmed. No curtain is drawn. In the way conversations begin before they are caught and choked back into silence. In the way some faces rise just long enough to look at the sky, not to pray, but to feel. For all the stillness, something has changed, something deeper than ritual, older than grief. You walk, and yet not toward the palace. Water is hauled. It was stone and echo, not toward the temple, but toward the edge of the builder's grounds. It's not morning, relief, and the sky is pale with late morning heat. You hear it? The symbol returning. The horizon, sharp as the blade of a forgotten god, and everywhere you pass, eye of Ra, mouth of Matiz, gone. Work continues. Tools strike down. Instructions are barked, but beneath it all, not shock. You see it in the way shoulders ease slightly when backs are turned. The Pharaoh got honored, and nothing has broken. No star has fallen. He sees you. No priest has screamed. No power has collapsed, because power was never there. The leaning stone, the place of the erased name, and you kneel, without thinking, without purpose, and you place your hand on the soil, not really, in performance. You pass the old painter from the Hall of Walls. High does not nod, but he does not look away. And you both know something false has ended, but something true remains. You find yourself near the grave, again the forgotten one, not to speak, not to summon, but to listen. And beneath the warm hush of earth, not as sound, but as rhythm, not as voice. And you understand now that the Pharaoh ruled nothing. Not the sky, not the grain, not the soul. But this hum in the dirt, this memory in the dust, this rules. It always did. And as the scribes began to prepare a new name, as gold is recast and seals broken and banners replaced, the builders will keep building, the dreamers will keep dreaming, and the symbol will remain, unspoken, unwritten, unbroken. The sun rises high, as if summoned more deliberately than usual, and the temple bells ring not in mourning, but in rhythm measured, practiced. K. Hollowand, you are called with the others, not by name, but by station, to stand among the outer ranks as the ceremony begins. Robes stiff from the dye of freshly pressed linen, your face powdered with pale dust to reflect the light evenly, because today is not for individuals. Today is for the idea, a God reborn, a kingdom renewed, a mask passed from silence to silence. The inner court is draped in red and gold, papyrus strewn across the stone like crushed stars, incense coiling upward into the invisible space, where gods are said to breathe. And the crowd, though hushed, is not mourning. They are rehearsing. Even the doves released from hidden cages seem to rise on cue, circling the sun like ornaments of obedience. And then he comes the new Pharaoh. Not a boy, not a man. Shape, a vessel. Holds aloft the signet ring of lineage, placing it slowly on the hand of the figure who no longer has a name, only titles. Draped in thread, heavier than air. Eyes darkened not by age, but by preparation. Lips sealed into a curve that suggests power without pleasure. He ascends the steps of the central platform between pillars carved with gods who no longer speak, and a priest older than stone itself. The people bow. You bow because you must. But as your eyes lower, your gaze brushes sideways and you see her, a young woman, no older than yourself. One of the water bearers, barely noticeable in her pale robe among the servants at the wall. But her hand is open, palm upward, and in the center, drawn in dust, or perhaps as you see it, the symbol, the spiral, the line, so small it could vanish in a breath, but it doesn't. It waits. You freeze not in fear, not in confusion, but in recognition, deeper than memory. She meets your eyes. She does not smile. She does not look away, but slowly so. Slowly, she curls her fingers over the symbol and presses her hand to her chest. And in that moment, everything changes. Not the ceremony, not the throne, not the crown, but the truth. You are no longer alone. Not to the crown, but to the hidden rhythm beneath it all. The symbol is no longer secret. It has passed again, hand to hand, heart to heart. The gods may be reborn today, but something older has already awakened. Something deeper, and you bow once more not to the throne, the rhythm that lives not in marble, not in gold, but in dust. The sun dips low behind the desert hills and the sky burns orange. Not with fire, but with the weight of 1,000 days passing into dust, and you walk slowly, purposefully away from the halls of polished stone, away from the golden masks and the painted gods who never speak, and back toward the camp where you once dreamed with your eyes open, back toward the land where the chant still echoes in the ribs of the earth, where names are forgotten, but presence is never erased. The air changes before you even see it. Not colder, not warmer, but fuller, as though something once buried has risen not to dominate, not to destroy, but simply to breathe. You step into the outskirts, past the cook fires, past the woven tents, past the sleeping mats, now arranged in shapes more deliberate than before, and it takes only a few steps more to see it. The stone, not the old one, a new one, but by hand, by fingertip, by careful pressure in damp sand, now hardened by sun, and upon it, the symbol, freshly carved, leaning forward just slightly, its surface marked not by tool, not once, but many times, etched into its face, layered and overlapping like voices joining in harmony. Each line imperfect, each spiral unique, each stroke a memory. You do not speak, you do not need to. Children pass by, their eyes half closed from heat and song, their bare feet kicking dust across the markings, and they do not scold the dust, they let it fall, because now the symbol lives not in secrecy, but in movement, in scattering. In return, move among them, not as a guide, not as a prophet, but as one of many. There are others drawing now, not always in stone, sometimes in cloth, sometimes in fire rash spread thin across dried leaves, sometimes in gesture and fingers held in the spiral for a moment before letting it drift away. It is not religion, it is not rebellion, it is remembering, and it is no longer yours, not with power, endless, it never truly was, and eternal. You sit beside the grave of the old one, now joined by others, marked not with names, but with circles, with symbols, and the earth beneath you hums, not with gods, but with life, dust-born,